In this video, I want to show you some advanced techniques that I use on my landscape photography that have been giving me really good results. This is a photo I just took very recently, and it's, I love how it turned out, but it was extremely difficult to capture in camera. This is a photo straight out of the camera without any work done to try to control the dynamic range. You can see that it's really bright at the end of the Slot Canyon, but I'm in a deep, dark cave in the Slot Canyon, and so this is just black down here. In fact, it was a little bit tough to see at the time. So the dynamic range is extreme, and it makes the photo look, well, kind of ugly. Whenever we have extremely high dynamic range situations, most photographers want to be able to control it so you can see into the shadows and still see the highlights at the same time. The way that I accomplish this, well, I use two different techniques. The first one that I want to show you is called a shuttered panorama. At least that's what I'm calling it. I don't know if other photographers are doing this. I'm sure it's been done before, but I've never heard anybody talk about it. And it's something that really works well for me. So this is what I do. Since the dynamic range or the brightness at the bottom is very low, it's very dark at the bottom, and it's extremely bright up top. And our camera can't capture both of them in one scene. Usually it looks like that. Ugh, really black and really white up there. So what I do is I took one picture horizontally, and I shot it. You'll see at the top, I shot it at 58 seconds shutter speed. That shows you just how dark it was when I was shooting this. 58 seconds shutter speed. Then I moved the camera up a little bit and I shot the next photo at 38 seconds shutter speed to properly expose that area in the photo. Then the next picture I took at a mere 10 seconds to get as much of the dynamic range of the bright areas as possible. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put these photos together in Photoshop like a panorama, but since we have this gradation of the shutter speeds, it's like what it does is it darkens down the top and brightens the bottom. So it's a really cool technique, but you have to do something special to post-process it correctly. So first we need to get the overall exposure of these three photos correct. This one is brighter than this one. And so I'm going to take this and I'm going to go into develop mode and I'm going to increase the exposure, especially in the shadows, until it's about the same exposure as that photo. I think that's about the same overall exposure. And then this photo, I want to match about the overall exposure to this. And I would say that's about a match. This one might be a touch bright. And now I'm going to open each of these photos in Photoshop. I'm just going to say edit in Photoshop. And now it's going to ask me, do I want the original or one with the edits that I've made in Lightroom? I want one with the edits that I have made in Lightroom. I have my three photos open now, and now I need to put them on one canvas. So I'll go ahead and just take the middle photo, and I'm going to go to Image, Canvas Size, and I'm going to make it just hugely tall and a little bit wide as well in case I kind of moved one side to the other. Ooh, nice blue background. Nice. And then I'm going to take this bottom photo and the top photo and just paste them on there. Now that I have my three layers here, I'm going to select them all, and then I'm going to go to Edit, Auto Align Layers. Why this isn't under the Layers palette, I'll never know. Say Auto and just say OK. After you finish aligning the layers, you're likely to end up with something like this, and you might have a freak out moment, but you are actually doing okay. I'm going to go ahead and crop in, and I am going to leave some of the area outside the photo, and I'll show you why later. And I'm going to crop in here, and I'll just hit enter. All right, now we can zoom in and we see our photo is actually looking pretty darn good. Now, most photographers hate doing this, but I'm going to just copy these layers and I'm going to go ahead and merge them down. Now, if you're a freak about you have to use a non-destructive workflow 100% of the time, great, don't do this, but you know what? It's easier. It's pretty easy to go back to these steps if I need to. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all of the area that is this checkerboard that's transparent. And I'm going to choose my tolerance higher up here and not worry about contiguous or anti-alias, so it'll get all of the areas that are this checkerboard see-through, even if they aren't touching each other. And now I'm going to hit Shift F5 to do Content-Aware Fill. The reason I'm doing this is I want to see if Content-Aware Fill is going to do a good enough job to fill in some of these areas so that I could go wider if I in fact choose to. We'll see how it does. As you can see, Content-Aware Fill did a really good job, and so I'm going to go ahead and keep it. I didn't do a very good job with my selection. I need to go ahead and refine that edge, but we'll get rid of these tiny little lines here. We're doing okay, but you can see a few things ended up kind of weird here. Like this area here, I'm just going to select and Content-Aware Fill it, and usually it'll do a good enough job. We just need to do a little bit of a cleanup of any of the areas that didn't quite come through perfectly. The photo is looking really good already. It feels like the bottom is stretched out just a little bit, and so I'm going to take my move tool and just smoosh up the photo because it feels smooshed the other way to me. Usually we don't want to smush pixels like that, but I think from combining the photos, it gave it a little bit of a weird perspective, and that will just correct it for us. All right, things are already feeling more natural, but we need to decide what's actually part of the story, and I feel like this bright area up here isn't part of it. It's just too bright, and we don't need it to tell the story of the ladder and the waterfall, so I'm going to crop off a good portion of it. Now, we were really lucky on this particular photo that it was a piece of cake to get the pieces together, to get that the exposure was right for each piece so that they blended together. Often that's not the case, and so I'll put the photos on different layers in Photoshop and just mask in between each layer with a very soft brush to make that a more gentle transition. Here, we lucked out because I made a really good guess in Lightroom, getting the exposure about right between all three of the photos. Now that we have this done in Photoshop, though, I'm just going to hit Command S or Control S in Windows World, and then once we're saved here, I can just go back to Lightroom. But before we get to styling this photo in Lightroom, there's one other way that you can accomplish this same thing that is also an advanced technique, and this is one that I use all the time. I call it the hat trick. If you just have a hat that's dark in color, or you could even use the screen of your cell phone that's black, anything you have. It could be a piece of black paper. And as you're taking pictures, if the sky is too bright and you have a longer shutter speed, just take that dark item and put it physically in front of the lens, blocking the part of the lens that is capturing the bright area in the photo. And you'll just move it around slowly and then get higher and higher. And at some point in the exposure, make sure the full lens is exposed. And then it's basically like a graduated neutral density filter. Because the top of the photo didn't get the exposure the same amount of time as the bottom of the photo, the top of the photo is then darkened. And you can even do this on smaller areas, like if you have a V in between two mountains, just get the corner of the cell phone and stick it in there to get that V dark, which is something that a graduated neutral density filter can't do. It can only do the straight lines. So those are two techniques that I use very frequently to compress the dynamic range while I'm out on the scene: a shuttered panorama and the hat trick. Now let's get back to the post-processing. Now we're ready to style the photo in Lightroom. It looks really bland, and we wanted to get it from here to here. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, almost all of the time when I'm putting together photos in Photoshop, I'm just going to use my presets. I'm going to mouse over my presets until I find one that works. But if you don't have the same presets that I have, or you want to know how I'm making them, I want to walk you through the process. I almost always warm up the white balance in my landscapes, and in this case I'm going to add a little bit of purple tint to it because the overall photo feels a little green to me. I'm going to add some vibrance, which touches the colors that are not as saturated, and bring down the saturation because I don't want the yellow to affect the rock too much. Then we're going to add some contrast. The overall exposure is fine, and I'm going to make the highlights go down and the shadows come up to further compress that dynamic range. But I'm going to bring the blacks down so that the area above the shadows still adds a nice difference between highlight and contrast. Now we need to add the color effects. So what I want to do is I want to change the hue of this rock and make it more red because that's how the rock is in this area. The camera sensor just didn't do a good job of picking it up. I'm going to grab my picker tool, which is where I select on a color, and I'm able to change the hue of it. I can change it green, or voila, I can make it look more red. And then if I want to do anything else, I can go into the split toning panel and I can take just the highlights and I can give them a color, but I'll bring that saturation way down. And I could do the same thing with the shadows if I felt like I needed to, but I don't think I do in this shot very much. So that's basically the process of how I'm going to create a Lightroom preset, how we're going to put this photo together, a shuttered panorama with brighter photo, darkest photo as you're going up into the sky to compress the dynamic range without bracketing. Thanks for joining me on this tutorial, and we'll see you in the next one.